Okay, so we are now talking about the second half of appraisal or evaluation, also known as performance management. So let's get right into that. We should be able to finish this in not too long, probably not as long as the previous video. So we started last time, just to quickly review, by talking about what is a performance management system. We talked about the objectives of this system to make sure that the employees understand the expectations, to give them feedback, to make sure there is continuous improvement for motivation so they can express themselves. We talked about the benefits for the employee and the employer. We talked about reasons to have an effective performance management system. And we talked about the 7 key criteria of performance management, which is that it should be SMART, reliable, valid, goal setting, standardized, all of that stuff. And then we talked about the 3-step appraisal cycle where you set the benchmark first, then you compare the employee relative to the benchmark. Is the employee better or worse? This benchmark could be anything. It could be a number of products sold per month. It could be a customer satisfaction rating. It could be how often they come late to work. It could be how clean their desk is. It doesn't matter. Whatever the benchmark that you're measuring is the employee above or below that? And then that's step 2, rate the employee. And then step 3 is to figure out if they're above, how do you give them a reward or praise? And if they're below, how do you improve so that their standard goes up to the benchmark? The benchmark doesn't change, and that's why it needs to be set first. And then finally, we talked about who should do the appraising. Should it be the manager? Should it be peers? Should it be 360-degree? Should it be subordinates? Should it be a crowd? Should it be a panel? Anything like that. And that gets us to our appraisal methods. And I said at the end of last class that we put these into 3 groups: quantitative, qualitative, and rating. So quantitative is things that involve numbers. Qualitative is things that involve opinions, and rating is things that involve rank. Again, quantitative is things that involve numbers. Let's just get it up here. So quantitative is things that involve numbers. Qualitative is things that involve opinions, and rank or rating, things that involve a rank, like from 1 to 10. So the first one, and we'll go through all of these. So the first one is essay evaluation. Essay evaluation is when you ask the manager to write a short, it doesn't have to be a 20-page essay, it could be 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs, but you ask the manager to write something about the employee, and this is how we evaluate the employee. So if I want to know how are the people in the advertising department doing, I might say to the manager, excuse me, I always forget my keyboard covering. I might say to the manager, okay, so we need to know how the employees in your department are doing. Please write a 1-page summary of each of them. And that's called essay evaluation. Now, for each of these methods that we talk about evaluating, I want to know 3 things. Number 1, what is it? Number 2, is it quantitative, qualitative, or rating? And number 3, what are some of the benefits and disadvantages of it? So essay evaluation is having a manager write paragraphs, right? Having a manager write paragraphs about the employee's strengths or areas requiring improvement. Is this quantitative? Is it about numbers? No, clearly not. It's obviously qualitative. It's about opinion, because this is the manager's opinion. What's good about it? Well, you get a lot of information about the employee, much more than you might get from just a survey or a questionnaire. You get lots of information. What's bad about it? As I wrote in the middle of the slide, it really depends on the manager's ability to write clearly. If the manager is not a good writer, you're going to get confusing or hard to read essays. Next, weighted checklist. Now this one is very common, one of the most common. Not the most, but quite close. So a weighted checklist is where you would have a list of, what would you say them, like descriptive statements, although that's not a very clear way to say this. So let me give an example. Let's say we're talking about teachers. And we would have a list of statements like, teacher always comes to class on time. And then we would have maybe 1 is never, 2, 3 is sometimes, 4, 5 is always. And the manager, so in my case, Eling, my manager, would say, well, David, yeah, he usually almost always comes to class on time. I'll give him a 5. 5 is always. And another sentence, a statement. So we're describing, the behavior of a teacher, the behavior of a salesperson, the behavior, so teacher is polite to students, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they would say, well, David is pretty polite, but not always. We'll give him a 3. So they circle 3. And another one is David is prepared for class. Well, David is usually prepared. We'll give him a 4. And another one would be David always dresses very well and has his hair nicely combed. And maybe David gets a 1 on that, Now, this is a list of descriptions of what we consider to be good behavior, or it could be ineffective. It could be bad behavior, such as teacher yells at students when they ask a question. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, David does not yell at students, so we'll give David a 1, because in this case it's a negative, so 1 is actually good. So it's just these statements about what's good and bad behavior, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that is probably what we would call a checklist. What makes this weighted? Weight is like something that's, heavy. So we have these sentences about being a teacher, coming on time, being prepared for class, dressing well and combing your hair, not yelling at students. Now, let's say my manager is Eling, and Eling knows me and she's going to fill these out. What she doesn't know is that the HR department that made this, let's say we have 4 questions, this is teacher comes on time. This is teacher is well dressed. This is teacher doesn't yell at students. This is teacher is always prepared. So we have 4 questions. They're not equally valuable. So teacher comes on time. Let's say out of 10, this is worth a 5. This is going to be bad. Write it that big. So teacher comes on time is worth a 5. How does teacher dress? That's worth a 2. I mean, okay, it just doesn't matter that much. Teacher is prepared for class. Out of 10, we consider that a 9. Teacher doesn't yell at students. We consider that very important. That's an 8. So if my score here for teacher comes on time was a 5. My score here, and I guess this is hard to read, that's not a 1. I'm just putting a line here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say teacher dresses well. David got a very low score. And let's say teacher is prepared for class. David got a high score. And teacher doesn't yell at students. Teacher got a pretty high score. So if this is a 5, 5 times 5 is 25. If this is a 4, 4 times 8 is 32. And if I got a 4 times 9, that's 48. Now this question about not dressing well, I got a low score, a 1. But 1 times 2 is only 2. So the point is, so the benefit of this is Eling can judge me without being able to sort of use her power to give me a very good rating, because she doesn't know necessarily what HR considers to be important. So HR makes this checklist. They decide what's rated a 9 out of 10 or what's only rated a 2 out of 10. And the manager receives this checklist without knowing the point values or weighted scores. So the manager doesn't know when they're giving me this evaluation which ones are really important according to HR, and that's good. especially in a big company, because then the managers are going to be much more fair. So that's the nice thing about this. Disadvantages, it takes a little more time to create this kind of evaluation. It's not as quick as like a survey or a questionnaire. Maybe it's still quicker than having the manager write essays though, but this is, as I said, a very commonly used evaluation method. So we'll go over it again in class, but I gotta make sure you understand this stuff. Forced choice. So a forced choice is, and I think we're gonna do this in class. If we didn't do it, no, I think we already did it last maybe 2 weeks ago, where I gave you a sentence with two choices that are both bad. If you remember, you have to choose one of them. This ensures objectivity. So what happens is you get 4 possible statements, and the evaluator must choose one statement. So let's say for a teacher, it's 4 statements. Teacher comes on time, but is disorganized and knows the subject very well, but the lecture is boring. That's just one sentence. And then another one. Teacher comes 10 minutes late, but the class is fun and the students are happy. But the students do badly on the test. And then another sentence is teacher comes on time, but is rude to the students, doesn't really understand the subject, but teaches very well from the textbook and the students get a high grade. Now you see, like this, it's really not clear to say which one of these is good and bad. They all have their positives and negatives, whether it's coming on time or being nice to students, or the students get a good grade, or the teacher's really prepared, or the class is fun. It's just not clear. But you'd have these 4 sentences, and my boss, Yiling, would have to choose one. She's forced to make a choice. And Yiling, my boss, doesn't know which is the most effective according to HR. Because maybe HR is really testing about coming on time, or HR is really testing about making the class fun, or is really testing about getting good grades. So Yiling wouldn't really know which one, so she can't kind of have a bias towards people that she wants to give a high rating to, because she doesn't even know which one is the high rating. So again, this is very, very useful. So by the way, I can't go backwards. The one we just did, the weighted checklist, is that quantitative, qualitative, or is that rating? Well, it's not rating because there's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's no like David's number 1 and Simon's number 2 and Anselm's number 3. That's rating. You know, in that system, all of the teachers could get a high score, all of the teachers could get a low score. So it's not ranked. Is it quantitative or qualitative? It is quantitative because we're using numbers, right? For each of those things, teacher comes late, teacher knows the subject, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You end up with a score, 32 plus 48 plus 2. You know, you end up with a score there. This one, forced choice, this is kind of stands in the middle. There's no numbers, it's just forced choices, just 4 statements. It's not ranking, because maybe every teacher gets the same, choice. Maybe everybody gets an A or a C or a D or whatever. So I'd say it is qualitative because it's the manager's opinion. Good thing about this, no bias, because the manager doesn't even know what HR is looking for. All the sentences have goods and bads. So the good thing is it reduces bias. The bad thing is it really is very narrow in what it tells us. HR can be looking for one attribute, behavior, such as coming late or making the class fun. But in terms of, it's not like a questionnaire where you could have a whole list of things. A questionnaire, the number 1 most common form of evaluation is the graphic rating scale method. That's by far the most common. And this is quantitative. It's exactly what we think of usually as an evaluation. It's a list, and it has all kinds of factors, like your attendance, your job knowledge, the quantity of work you did, and for every factor, there are boxes, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so there are these point values. Sometimes there's also a descriptive word, like very good, good, average or satisfactory and below average. You know, there might be boxes, or it might say 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. Now, the good thing about this is you can have a lot of stuff on one page, and that's great. So the bad thing about this is you get so little information. So it's similar to something that I think is more effective called BARS, the behaviorally anchored rating scale. But graphic rating scale, which we'll talk about in a minute, lists a number of traits. So here's an example of a trait, and I'll show you an example of a graphic rating scale in a second, but a trait is like a quality or a characteristic of your behavior. So coming on time, punctuality is a trait. Open-mindedness is a trait. Compassion is a trait. Friendliness, being comfortable with new people, being organized versus messy, being calm, being neurotic, being, any of these things are character traits. So here's communication. And in this case, we're not using numbers, we're using words. We have 3 words or terms. We have below expectation, meets expectation, or role model. It's the same as saying bad, medium, good, right? Same idea. So what we would have is, we would have a sentence that, and this is pretty much what they use in universities too, that tells the manager, like Eiling or, or me for grading you guys, what this is supposed to be. So for communication, what is below expectation? Not very good communication. Well, even if David gets guidance, even if people help him, he fails to prepare communications. He's not good at writing forms or paperwork and records. He's late. He's not accurate. That's bad. Meets expectation, he gets guidance, so someone is helping me. But with the help, I'm able to do communications and forms and paperwork. I can be timely and accurate. What's a role model? Excellent. I'm independent. I don't even need help. I'm the one who helps others, and I can do all these things with few, if any, corrections. It's all very good quality. That would be an example of communication. And we might have 10 of these or 20 of these, 50 of these, whatever, on a piece of paper. That is, here's the evaluation for David. Well, communication, I'll give him a good score. And punctuality, being on time, I'll give him a mediocre score. And dressing well, I'll give him a bad score. And friendliness, I'll give him a good score. And, the good thing about this is Eiling could do the evaluations for all of the teachers in 20 minutes. You can evaluate 100 people, as long as you know them. You might need to do an interview with them and then fill out the form. But you could do this really fast compared to writing an essay. Also, once the HR department makes these forms, which kind of look like this, and I know it's small, you can look at it on the PPT, but here, for example, is the first one, communication. And here's below expectation, meets expectation, role model. You really only need to have these sentences kind of one time. And the next one is, your organizational knowledge. And the next one is your personal, I can't even read that, personal something. Can I read it? No, it's even smaller here. Next is your teamwork. Next is your something research, something behavior results. I can't read it. But anyway, these are all different traits that you might be rating an employee on. And let's say you have here's a 5-point scale. Like here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's 4, here's 5, right? 5 is the best, 1 is the worst, and you just circle it. It's so fast. What's the disadvantage, right? The advantage is it's so fast. The disadvantage, look how little information you really get about me, compared to an essay that Eiling would write, or compared to a weighted checklist that might be more. This doesn't even tell you which one's more important. For someone reading this, you wouldn't even know if communication is more important than being on time, is more important than dressing well. And that just doesn't give us a lot of information. But if you're a manager with 100 employees, you might want to use this. This is, of course, quantitative. It's the most quantitative of all of them. It's just nothing but numbers. No weights though, just numbers. Next is our first ranking. This is called alternation ranking. Now here you take a trait. Again, a trait is a quality of your behavior, like communication. And this will be similar to something we'll see in a minute called force distribution. That's for larger groups. But you take one trait like communication, and you simply rank everybody from best to worst. So in our office for communication, Susan, then Mike, then Jen, then Andy. So in our office, there's Vance, then Simon, then Anselm, then David, then Naeem, then Nicola. You just make a list. That's it. What's the benefit of doing this? Well, sometimes when you're dealing with evaluations, it's because you're going to give people a bonus or a promotion or an opportunity to go take a company trip. We can only send 10 salespeople to the convention in Las Vegas, and we have 45 salespeople. How do we choose the 10? Well, let's say we use one of the previous evaluation methods we looked at. So we use the graphic rating method, and we look at these charts, we circle these numbers, and we say, okay, so we did these circles for being on time and being friendly to the customers and dressing well and having a good knowledge of the product, and we filled these out. We have 45 people, 40 of them all got the score of between 45 and 47. They all got the same score. So that was useless. It didn't work. And the same thing for the weighted checklist. Maybe they all got the same score. And the essays, how does an essay really tell us who should go to Las Vegas this one time? Sometimes you just need to know who's the best. Now, this is incredibly opinion-based. So this is ranking, but it is still very qualitative. It's got numbers in it, I guess, but I wouldn't say these numbers rate people really. What's rating people here is just the manager's opinion. And so in that sense, it's very qualitative, but sometimes you just need to know who's the best. You can't give everybody a score. You can't write an essay for everybody. You have to know who's the best. What if you have to fire someone? You have to know who's the worst. If you give everybody a graphic rating or a weighted checklist, what if everybody gets the same score? Then you don't fire anybody? You really sometimes need to know who's the best and the worst. Another method that's similar to this, but maybe a little better, since this is so subjective, the manager really could, what if the manager just likes Susan the best? And the manager has really wonderful conversations with Susan or their neighbors or something, and the manager doesn't like Tom, so they give Tom a worst ranks. That's a problem. So the paired comparison helps to fix that problem. This is still a rank. It's still a ranking. But now, instead of comparing the employees just to everybody, who's the best at communication? Oh, it's Vance, followed by Simon, followed by Anselm, followed by David. You're just comparing us to each other. Instead, and this takes a little longer, but it's more objective, pick one trait, like communication, and for each trait, we're going to compare with a plus or a minus each person to each person. So let's talk about David's communication skills. How is David compared to Vance? Is David better than Vance or worse than Vance? Well, let's say David is worse than Vance. Okay, David, and so we would have these columns, right? Just like, so let's say we're checking for, David here. We compared David to Vance. So here, David gets a minus. And this is David, and this is Vance. Terrible drawings. And here is Simon. How is David compared to Simon? Who's better at communicating? Oh, Simon's better at communicating. So David gets a minus. And then we'll compare David to Anselm. Who's better at communicating, David or Anselm? Oh, David is better at communicating, so David gets a plus. And who's better, David versus Naeem? David is better than Naeem, so we get a plus. And obviously I'm not being serious. I'm just making, whatever examples, doesn't matter. And then you would look at the columns and you would see, so then we're going to compare, and we would also, we'd have a column here for David. We can't compare David to David, of course, but let's compare Vance. We don't compare Vance to Vance, but compared to Simon, who's better, Vance or Simon? Oh, Vance is better. And who's better, Vance or Anselm? Anselm is better, so he gets a minus. And who's better, Vance or Naeem? Oh, Vance is better. And so we're going to add these pluses and minuses to see who has the most. And that will tell us for this one trait, communication, who's better. So an example would look like this. So let's say for quality of work, and we have 5 people, right? Art, Maria, Chuck, Diane, and Jose. Those are our 5 names. And we have the same 5 on the top. And obviously we cannot compare Art to himself, but we can compare Art to Maria. Who's better? Art is better. Compared to Chuck, Art is better. Compared to Diane, Diane is better. Art is worse. Compared to Jose, Art is worse. Now Maria compared to Art, Maria is worse. We can't compare her to herself. Maria compared to Chuck, Maria's worse. Maria compared to Diane, Maria's worse. Maria compared to Jose, Maria's worse. And then at the end, we look who has the most pluses looking downwards. And here, Maria has the most. So for quality of work, Maria ranks highest. Now you see, that's a lot more objective, because in my case, Eileen would not just be thinking, who do I talk to the best? Who do I remember having the best communication with students? That's not really fair, because you look at a subject like, for me, I'm teaching management, where students are coming in all the time for meetings. Compare that to Naeem, who teaches statistics. He just doesn't have the same kind of lengthy discussions with students. It's mathematics. So it would be unfair for Eileen to just judge based on, who do I see talking to students more? Oh, I see David talking more, so I guess David's better. Right? For the trait of creativity, again, we're going to compare these people to each other. Then we look downwards and we see that Art has the most pluses. He ranks the highest for this trait. So again, we're ranking people. This is rank, but it's a lot more objective. What is bad about it? It takes much longer, right? Imagine you have 50 people. You just really can't do it. You could with a computer or even a spreadsheet, but it just would take a very long time. But much more objective. And if we're talking about a promotion or a bonus or getting a company car or a vacation, or, if we're talking about a significant benefit, if you are too subjective, the employees really may complain. Very important to be objective. Next is forced distribution. This is very much like the rank that we looked at before, the alternation rank, where you just said, okay, for communication, Eiling says, I think Vance is the best. Then I think Anselm. Then I think Simon. She's just being subjective. This is the same idea, but for a much larger group of people, maybe 200 employees. Now, if you have 200 employees, even 100, there's a big, big problem with ranking people like that, even if you need to. Because if you rank us 100 teachers like that, what's the difference between number 33 and number 34? What's the difference between 76 and 77? There's just no difference, and it's so unfair to say number 34 gets some sort of benefit, but number 35 doesn't. How do you, and if you have even more, what if you have 1,000 employees? How is 638 different from 639? There's just no difference at all. And so you need another method when you need to rank people. And we call this forced distribution. It's forced because you take a predetermined percentage of employees. For example, 20%, and this is a very common split, 20, 70, 10. 20% of employees must be in the top. The middle can be 70, and the bottom must be 10%. Must be. So Sun Microsystems is a software, hardware, computer company, and what they were doing is they would look in groups of 30 people. And the bottom 10%, They said you can take an exit package, we'll give you money right now, and you quit. That's it. Or we'll give you a 90-day performance improvement plan. If you're still in the bottom 10% in 90 days, you can resign and you get your severance. That's like a payment, a small payment to leave the job. Not as good as exit package. And then if you don't want to take that, okay, we'll give you another 90 days. And if you're still in the bottom 10%, you're fired, no pay. Now, what's good about doing something like this? The advantages of a forced distribution method are you can deal with a lot of people at the same time. That's really good. Another thing is it avoids the middle bias. The middle bias is a very common bias for a manager. So managers don't usually want to say this employee, unless they're terrible, they don't want to give someone a 2. You know, that's just, it feels bad. And, you know, they don't want to give someone a 5 necessarily. So managers give like 3, 4, 3, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4, 3, 3, 4. It just always is in the middle. And the problem is it doesn't help us. If we really need to know, if I'm the CEO and I really need to know who the best people are, I can't have the managers feeling bad and just writing 3, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4, 3, 3, 4. So this gets rid of that because you can't. 10% of the people are in the bottom. I don't care if they're all Einstein. 10% of them can't be as good as the others. As a manager, you're forced to choose who's in the bottom. So that's an advantage. It prevents supervisors from just marking everybody satisfactory. And it makes these top and bottom people really stand out. And that can be a big benefit. Disadvantages. This is unforgiving. You're in the top or you're not. That's it. Also, if you're a very high performing team, you still have to cut 10%. And slow performing teams, they get to keep 90%. So it's not really as clear as being able to do a paired comparison ranking or a weighted checklist or maybe even a graphic rating scale. Because for this, you're looking at 200 people and saying, you know, okay, this group, you know, I looked at their numbers of sales for this month. They're in the top 20%. This group, look, their sales are bad. Their customer satisfaction is low, bottom 10%. But what about this guy? He's really nice to people. We can't. We just don't have the time to look at all 200 people and do a graphic rating or a weighted checklist or a paired comparison to see who has the best communication skills. And yeah, this guy might have amazing communication skills. We're still putting him in the bottom 10%, and we might lose him. But when we have 200 people, we just sometimes don't have the manpower, I should say person power, I guess, to really be able to do a more detailed or careful evaluation of everybody. Another type of method is called the critical incident method. Critical incident method is a little bit similar to essay. So, oh, by the way, the last one, paired comparison, we said is still ranking. Forced distribution, quantitative, right? We're talking, and yeah, it's the opinion of the manager who's in the top 20% or the bottom 10%, but this opinion comes from numbers. Your sales numbers, your employee satisfaction numbers. It can't be your opinion based on who you like and who you don't. Not really, or it shouldn't be. It should be based on numbers, because if someone says, hey, you chose Maria to be in the top group, but I know her sales are bad, then the manager has to prove to HR that Maria's sales are good, or else why is she in that group? And then it might be nepotism or bias. Nepotism is where you hire a member of your family. It could be bias, it could be a friendship relationship, or it could be a quid pro quo, where Maria gave something, a gift of some sort, to the manager, and that's why they chose her. Critical incident method is like the essay, except the essay is written by the manager, and the critical incident method is written by the employee. So with an essay, the manager, like Yi-Ling, would write a few paragraphs about David. I remember when I met David and he started teaching business law and he's improved in these ways and I think he could still. And she would write an essay about Simon. The difference with a critical incident is it would be me keeping an anecdotal record. Anecdote is a story about an experience you had personally, right? Or a story about an experience somebody had, but in this case, you. And I would be writing down. Today was Monday, and I had 3 students come to ask me questions. One of those students I remember was named Maria, and she was being very loud in the hallway, and I asked her to be quiet, and she gave me a dirty look. And then Tuesday, nothing interesting happened today. And Wednesday, I had a really nice conversation with the students in class today, and we stayed late 5 minutes. You just write down these kind of good things that happened and these bad things that happened. Now, theoretically, Eling could also do this, but I'm the person who knows more what's good and bad. And we would review this, at predetermined times. So maybe every month or every 3 months or 6 months, I sit down with Eling, and instead of her just giving me a rank or a number score or an essay opinion or a qualitative opinion, instead, her and I can look at this sort of diary, this log of the experiences I had. Also, if I'm doing this all year, one of the really big benefits of this is it helps reduce this short-term bias, which is a manager's tendency to only judge you on what happened recently. So you might be getting an evaluation once every year or once every 6 months at most. And imagine that in January, all of the customers loved you and you were doing great and you sold a lot of stuff. You even helped the packaging department come up with a new way to package things that was saving the company money. In February, your sales were really good. And then in March, you had a bad fight with a coworker. And in April, your sales were low because you had some family problems and you were just having trouble at home. And then you get your rating in May. And the manager looks at you and says, listen, the last month your ratings were low. And I know you had some problems at home, but you also fought a lot with a coworker. And I just think, I'm going to have to give you a low score. Because they're only focusing on what they remember, what happened recently. And if you say, well, but back in January, it sounds like you're trying to negotiate. I know I'm a bad employee, but back then I used to be good. And the manager would say, well, we're not talking about back then, we're talking about now. One of the benefits, the really big benefits of critical incident is it removes that short-term bias. And it allows the manager to really look back and say, oh, great work, wasn't as good here, but okay, I now have a whole very complete picture of this. What's the problem with this? It takes a long time. It takes longer. It takes a longer time for the employee to write the stuff down every day, and it takes the manager a much longer time to read it. For Eling to give me a graphic rating method evaluation, she's just circling numbers. She could do it in 5 minutes. For a weighted checklist, the same. She'd do it very quick. For a forced choice, she would look at these 4 sentences and think about it. Okay. Paired ranking could take a little bit longer, but nothing like reading 40 pages of diaries for every teacher or every employee. What if you have 50 employees? This would take you all, weeks to do. So sometimes it's just not realistic if you have too many employees to do this. The method that I think I like the most is this method, the BARS method. There's only a couple of others, but BARS is probably my favorite method. That's the behaviorally anchored rating scale. So it's still rating, which means it's just like any other rating scale. It's going to give us a who's best and a who's second and who's third and who's fourth and who's fifth. It's going to give us that kind of rank. Oh, sorry, it's rating, not ranking. I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. It is not rank. It's rating. So it's going to give us these numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 type numbers. That's good. because that's very, very quantitative. And that's the graphic rating scale benefit. Graphic rating scale is super quick. You know, you just circle these numbers and you add the total score, and then you see, oh, David got the best score. And like I said, one of the problems is maybe everybody got the score of 70. Maybe it's not just me, so you can't say, oh, David's number one, because 10 different employees all got the 70 score. So it's not a ranking system, but it is quantitative. However, it's also qualitative. It also involves opinions, and it also uses the critical incident method we just talked about with these anecdotal ideas of what was good and what was bad. Today I stayed with the class and had a really wonderful discussion. That's really useful to think about what's good behavior. Or today a student was outside talking loudly and I was in a bad mood, so I yelled at the student and the student cried. Well, I mean, that's bad behavior. We want to keep that stuff, but we also want to have numbers. So the idea of this, of bars, is it anchors. And an anchor is on a boat, that big piece of metal that they drop off the side of the boat. I don't even know if they still use those anymore. I guess they must. But you drop it off the side of a boat, and what it does is it holds the boat in place so it can't move relatively. You know, and that's what we want to do here. We want to hold something in place. What are we trying to hold in place? Well, part of the problem with the graphic rating scale, this graphic rating scale, where we say, the teacher came to class on time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher really knew his subject, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher dressed well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher was never late, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher was kind to the students, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The teacher graded the students very easy, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have all these things, all these traits, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The problem is there's no universal definition of what 4 means, or what 5 means, or what 1 means. What if you have a manager and Eiling is really strict, and in her opinion, if you're great, you get a 3. 3 is great. 4 is like perfect, and nobody gets a 5. And that's just the way she does it. So she does my graphic rating and I get almost all 3s. And then the CEO looks at it and says, oh, David's rating is pretty bad. Maybe we should think about replacing David. Definitely don't give David a promotion or a bonus. I mean, that's terrible for David. Think about it the other way. What if Eiling always rates really easily? And she gives everybody like 5, 5, 4, 5, 5, and everybody gets that. Well, that's not good either. You know, what if she gives people a 2 very easily, or a 1 very easily? The point is her rating system versus mailing, versus the CEO, versus the dean, they all might have a different definition of what 3 or 4 is, because they're not anchored. They're not fixed so they can move around. For Eiling, 4 is over here. For the dean, 4 is over here. They're both writing 4, but they're both totally different. So we need to anchor. What does a 4 mean? We need to all know the same thing that it means. So let's look at something like an example of sales skills. What would a 4 or 5 be for sales? Now, we're not just going to say good or friendly with the customer. That's what we would have done on the weighted checklist or the graphic rating scale. Instead, we're going to use the critical incident method. And I know I'm throwing around a lot of these evaluation vocabulary words, but we'll go over them again in the tutorial. So you would use the critical incident method, which is to say you tell a little story, a 1-sentence story. For example, the customer said they needed a product for a special purpose, and the salesman emphasized our product's usefulness for that purpose. That's a story. It doesn't say employee was nice to customer. It doesn't say employee communicated effectively. It doesn't say employee had compassion. It tells a story. What about a 9 or 10, a really good story? A customer said she might buy from us or from our competitor, When the finance department rejected her application, the salesperson compared our lower priced model to our competition and convinced her to buy our model. That's a story. It's a 2-sentence story of what a really good salesperson experience would be. What about a 1 or 2? The customer said he didn't like the looks of our product. The salesperson said, well, that's our style, and that the customer would probably be happier with the competitor's model. That's not good behavior. It doesn't say that the employee was mean to the customer, or the employee didn't care about the customer, or the employee was bad at communication. Instead, it tells a story. And that's what we want, because it anchors us. When we look at this story of 1 or 2, or 9 or 10, the manager, a new manager, could look at this and say, oh, I understand. I kind of have a feeling of what that is. Without this, what if Ealing hires a new manager and they come in and they're like, David, I don't know, 7, 3, 5, 8. They're all over the place because they don't know what these numbers mean. So a bars scale, a rating scale, would look like this. Now, the problem with them is they take a long time, because for each trait, communication, creativity, being on time, being friendly, being open-minded, knowing your subject, whatever it is, you need a whole nother piece of paper. So this one is just for salesmanship. And here's a 10, and here's a 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have these little stories. So what's a terrible salesman? The prospect said he didn't like the looks of our vehicle, and the salesperson told him the style is the style. You'd probably be happier with our competitors. What's a little bit better, 3 or 4? The buyer said she really wanted a special order car with an unusual color and amenities, and the salesperson said she'd be better off not waiting 2 months and should settle for a standard model. I mean, it's okay. Maybe it's a little below average, but it just gives us a picture of what this looks like. Especially when we read all of the stories, we have a good idea of how our company thinks about really high quality salesperson, medium salesperson, a little less than medium salesperson, bad salesperson. Looking at this gives us a context. And then for creativity, we have another one. For communication, we have another one. These take a long time to create for HR. Once they're created, you're good. You don't need to create them again. And then they can be used pretty quickly. So as long as HR has time to create these, I consider these to be the best, because they can also be used by new managers. When a manager comes in and really doesn't know people as well, and we want to make sure that, let's say you're in a company, a department that has 3 managers or 5 managers, or you're being rated by more than one person. You really want to make sure that everybody's using the same number for 4 or 2. You don't want one person giving you a 5 and one person giving you a 2, and then trying to figure out, am I a 5 or a 2? Why do you give me a 2? Oh, because he grades hard? No, we should all have an anchor for what 4 means. And we'll do a little exercise on this during our tutorial. Next is MBO. So MBO, Management by Objectives, is really the same as goal setting. So we've talked about goal setting before, and I said with goals that they need to be SMART goals, and you need to know what that means. And also I said that the goals need to be participative. So having the employees work with the management to set the goals together is far more effective than the management setting the goals alone. Also, there should be feedback. This should be periodically discussed. And those are the 3 things that I want you to know about MBO. SMART goals, they should be participative, and there should be feedback. Those are the 3 keys to good goal setting. Also, in addition to this, the goals of the manager or the employee should match the goals of the organization. If the goal of CIP is to have a very entrepreneurial business school, then the goals that Ealing has for David should be about helping students to open a business, teaching, making sure the business law class has something about opening businesses in China, making sure that the HR class is targeting working in HR in China, or a small business and not talking only about 500 employee companies, but targeting 5 employee companies, it wouldn't make sense for the Eling's goal for David to not match the goal for the entire university. It should always align. That should be that alignment of goals. So you can see that here, you start by setting the organization's goals, then the department's goals. Then at the end, you might have the employee's goals, right? What do we expect from the employee? We're going to do a performance review. We'll provide feedback. So SMART goals, participative, with feedback, and keep it all aligned with this hierarchy of goals that we learned about. And there's another slide about that, right? So but the idea is simple. You just start at the top. There's a hierarchy of goals. You set it from the top. What's the company-wide goal for, next year, for example? Then what do the department heads need to do to achieve that goal? Then they discuss that with the employees, and then they ask the employees to set individual goals. This is the participative part, right? So these 6 steps really integrate this idea of establishing SMART goals. This is the short-term SMART goal. They create the SMART target. Then it has to be participative. You work with the manager to define the goal. It needs to have feedback. There should be review meetings with the employees to discuss it, to fix it, to change it. And it should always be compared, the actual results to the expected results. That's feedback. So SMART goals, participative, feedback, and hierarchy of goals. Next, self-evaluation. Well, this is pretty clear. This is, now, by the way, that we already talked about bars. We said bars is quantitative because they're numbers, but it also has a qualitative element to it. It's not a ranking system, but it is quantitative meets qualitative. MBO is not a rank because it doesn't tell you who's number 1 and who's number 2, who's number 3. Is it quantitative? Is it about numbers? When you do MBO, do you get a score? David got a 63 and Simon got a 105 and Vance. Now there's no numbers in MBO. Right? It's setting a goal, working together, communicating about the goal. What are your expectations? What are your actual performance? What's the feedback? What could you correct? What was a good job? That's all very qualitative. Self-evaluation, also very qualitative. There's no numbers really here. And this is where you ask someone to evaluate themselves. And there's benefits and drawbacks to this. We just talked about MBO. What's the benefit of MBO? You get very clear goals that are set that really match the hierarchy, the organization's goals. That's really good. The drawback, I talk about a plan that takes a while. This is a multi-step plan that involves numerous meetings between the supervisors and the employees. This is not a sit down with a piece of paper and circle numbers and you're done in 20 minutes sort of thing. Self-evaluation. What's good about this? Well, the manager doesn't have to do anything except read them at the end. You could give me a graphic rating chart and I circle numbers for myself. More often it's writing. More often it's writing an essay about my strengths, about the areas that I need to improve, maybe where I'd like to have more experience or education. What's that about? Why are you drawing that, David? More experience or education? Now it's gone down. Let's see, third time. Experience or education, there we go. Things I like about work, things I don't like about work, projects I'd like to work on, that's a really good one. My career goals for now or for long term, what I think I need to do to achieve my goals. The benefit of this is people can actually be very honest when they're rating themselves. The drawback, the disadvantage of this, obviously people can also be dishonest. If I know this is about my salary, then people do have a temptation to improve their rating because they want a higher salary. Pretty much everybody wants a higher salary. So the temptation is extremely high to give yourself an improved rating when it's about money or salary or benefits, promotions, opportunities, company trips, being part of a conference, any kind of opportunity. So it's very important with a self-evaluation to not tie this to money. This really shouldn't be tied to tangible benefits. Next is 360-degree feedback. This is an evaluation method where people are evaluated by everybody. They're evaluated by the management, they're evaluated by their subordinates, the people below them, they're evaluated by their peers, people at the same level. They might even be evaluated by the customers or the suppliers or vendors. They might be evaluated by stakeholders. Literally anyone could evaluate. This is a great method, right? You really learn about the employee. If you're rating me at CIP, you'd have all the students, you'd have the people in the coffee shop, you'd have the local businesses, you'd have my other teachers, you'd have my boss. Everybody would rate me. You'd get a very clear picture of who David is. Of course, and I would even rate myself. Everybody would rate me. The problem is I talk about so much information. It's not that it takes forever to have people fill out a survey. It's just compiling and organizing this much information is a lot to do, certainly without a computer. Okay, is it quantitative or qualitative? Probably quantitative, because you have so many different people rating David that they're all going to be using numbers and circling, 4, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 5, 4. They're all going to be circling numbers. You can't ask everybody to write an essay about David. That's all of it. How do we choose the right one? I mean, that's really, really part of the issue on the final exam is you now know a whole bunch of different ones, but they're not all right for the same, they're not all suitable for the same situation. You definitely wouldn't use every single one of these at the Carter Cleaning Company. That's the kind of thing we need to be able to understand as people who take an HR class in university and then maybe do go get a practical job or are starting a business or working in a startup and being entrepreneurs. We want to understand that there are many ways to evaluate somebody. What's the best one in this situation? What if you're a manager in a company and you need to evaluate both non-exempt employees who work in a factory and get an hourly wage and exempt employees who are their supervisors? You might need more than one method of evaluation. So we're going to look at the specific purpose of the program. Are you trying to evaluate punctuality, using machines, being on time, being friendly, growth, development, productivity, sales? All of these might have different best choices, and we'll do a little exercise on that in class. The level of the employee. Are we evaluating people who are exempt or non-exempt? That's going to be a huge difference. You would probably never want to use a self-evaluation or an essay evaluation for non-exempt employees. You should be able to explain why. The climate of the management. In a traditional climate like banks, traditionally finance, law, a lot of weighted checklists or forced choices are used to remove bias and subjectivity. And part of the reason is you have so many people working in these environments. In a finance company, you might have hundreds and hundreds of people. In a pharmaceutical company, in these traditional businesses, they mostly are using checklists, whether it's graphic rating scale, weighted checklist, forced choices. It's much less common to use a ranking method. Like forced distribution is quite common, like the example in Sun Microsystems. Also, the experience level. Has an employee been with us for a year or been with us for 10 years? That's going to change the way we evaluate them. And then organizational growth. Are we trying to grow quickly or not? If we're trying to grow quickly, we might want to use a ranking method so we really know who's the best at different sort of skills. Okay, so a review, we just did 12 different appraisal methods. Now, there actually is more stuff that I need to talk about with counseling and coaching and appraisal, possible appraisal problems. is what I need to talk about, that and the interview, and there actually is quite a bit. So I'm going to stop here because we're at 1 hour, and this will just be, you know, a 3-video week. Look at the giant smile on my 3-video face. 3 videos. Okay, great to see you guys. It's a weird thing to say because I can't see any of you, but great to have you see me, and I will see you guys later in the next video.